My name is Maris Caldwell. I'm 38, a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in Portland, Oregon, and I've spent most of my adult life balancing work, family, and the quiet weight of responsibility. I'm careful, dependable, the kind of person everyone counts on even when I feel stretched too thin. Saturday morning, I was scrolling through my phone during a brief break between patients when a text from my son, Henry, lit up the screen. Trip is canceled. Money's tight. We'll stay home this year. My chest sank, and I leaned back against the wall of the break room, coffee still steaming in my hand. I had been looking forward to a weekend at the lake, the one place our family always went to escape the city chaos. Without hesitation, I pulled out my schedule. I called the nurse coordinator and shifted my weekend assignments to cover more hours. I didn't think twice about it. Henry had never asked for much. And if rearranging my life meant helping him and keeping the family afloat, I would do it. That was who I was. By mid-morning, the hospital corridors buzzed with the usual rhythm monitors beeping, nurses calling out vitals, the distant wail of an ambulance, but my mind lingered on Henry's message. A small, nagging doubt whispered at the edge of my thoughts, but I pushed it aside. Money was tight. He had said. It all made sense. As I finished charting my last patient before lunch, I slid my phone back into my pocket. I didn't know that within hours, everything I believed about my son, our family, and the sacrifices I had made would be thrown into question. The text was simple, the request ordinary, but the implications were about to ripple through my life in ways I could never have imagined. Setting the stage for the weekend I had already promised to work, I arrived at St. Mary's on Saturday morning before sunrise, the hospital parking lot nearly empty, except for a few early arriving staff. My feet ached from the week, and my shoulders still carried the tension of sleepless nights. But I clocked in, uniform crisp and hair pulled back, ready to face the chaos. The ICU hummed with life monitors beeping, ventilators cycling, nurses calling out vitals. I moved from room to room with practiced efficiency, tending to patients while my mind wandered to Henry. I'd told him I'd cover the weekend, and I meant it. Money was tight, yes, but his family had always counted on me. I had grown accustomed to the quiet expectation that I would step in, give more, do more, often without acknowledgement. Between charting and administering medications, I ran mental calculations. If I picked up these extra shifts, the overtime would cover groceries, utilities, a small cushion in case something unexpected came up. Another weekend working while the family enjoyed the lake trip seemed ordinary, almost routine. But a small pit of exhaustion had begun to grow in my stomach. I remembered the evenings spent helping Henry's mother with bills, the weekends I'd driven 2 hours to fix something at the lake house she couldn't manage, and the quiet moments when I had handed over another check without question. Loyalty had always guided me, and I had never considered the weight of it until now. As I moved through another 12-hour shift, by mid-afternoon, I caught myself lingering over a patient's chart longer than necessary, imagining what the lake must look like, golden sunlight on the water, laughter drifting across the dock, Henry smiling among his parents, unaware that I was missing it all. The frustration gnawed at me, but I shoved it down. This was what responsibility felt like, what sacrifice looked like. The day blurred in a rhythm of alarms, charts, and patient calls, and I realized that helping had become instinct, almost reflex, a quiet sacrifice woven into my identity. As the evening shadows crept across the ICU floor, I pulled my jacket tight, prepared to return for Sunday, unaware that my instinctive generosity was about to collide with a truth I hadn't yet dared to see. By Sunday morning, Exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. My body ached from the extra shifts, but it was the gnawing feeling in my chest that unsettled me most. Henry had called twice overnight, and each time I caught only the tail end of his voice, clipped and hurried. I assumed it was stress or the usual weekend rush, yet a flicker of unease had begun to form. When I finally reached him on Sunday afternoon, he sounded different, hesitant, almost rehearsed. "Mom? About next month?" He trailed off, and I waited, but no clear request came. Odd phrasing, vague terms. It was the first time I noticed these subtle cracks in the ease I had taken for granted. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had a tough weekend. Perhaps work was demanding. I told myself I was overthinking, that I had been conditioned to read too much into tone and pauses. Still, the pit in my stomach refused to disappear. I replayed past conversations in my mind, texts that had seemed ordinary, requests that had felt urgent, and wondered if I had missed similar hints before. Later, while stocking supplies in the ICU, I checked my phone again. A missed call from Henry blinked at me, then another from Melissa, his wife. I had ignored them for a moment of mental reprieve, yet my fingers hovered, unable to ignore the small tension building with each notification. Something felt off, subtle, but undeniable, like a thread unraveling quietly beneath the surface. I shifted the boxes of gauze to reach the new shipment, telling myself to focus, but my thoughts kept returning to the lake house, the family trip, and the quiet questions I had avoided. The unease lingered, mingling with the fatigue and frustration I already carried. I knew instinctively that I needed to pay attention to notice the small inconsistencies before they became undeniable truths. The weekend had yet to end, and the first hints of betrayal were already threading through my carefully ordered life. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my scrubs, scrolling through the hospital's sparse Wi-Fi to check personal messages when a notification from Melissa, Henry's wife, lit up my phone. Curiosity, dull at first, gave way to an icy knot in my stomach. I tapped her profile, and the screen filled with sunlight, laughter, and the sparkling water of the Columbia River Gorge. The lake house, the dock, Henry grinning in the corner of a perfectly framed photo, glass raised. Around him, his parents, cousins, and a few friends I barely recognized, toasted beneath a canopy of string lights. The wide smile I expected to see aimed at me was missing entirely. My absence was clear, almost deliberate. I scrolled through more images, each one a sharp jab, the family preparing meals together, canoeing across the water, huddled around a fire pit as night fell. I traced the faces, counting the people I had helped support for years, the $2,800 monthly transfers that covered property taxes, maintenance, and emergencies I had quietly handled. The realization hit with a sudden, brutal clarity. Every dollar I had sent had funded my own exclusion. I dropped the phone onto the bed beside me. My hands shook. My heart thumped against my ribs like it wanted to escape. The betrayal was tangible, physical, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. The quiet moments of doubt from yesterday crystallized into a painful truth. They had taken my loyalty for granted, manipulated my generosity, and treated me as invisible while enjoying the life I had helped sustain. The sunlight streaming through the blinds no longer felt warm. Instead, it highlighted the contrast, their laughter and joy. My solitary apartment, the unspent overtime I had earned. Anger flared, sharp and hot, mingled with the sting of heartbreak. I realized that for years, I had been careful, meticulous, and generous, yet they had orchestrated a performance designed to exclude me. I picked up my phone again, and a message from Henry appeared. "Need $2,800. It's urgent." My thumbs moved automatically as I typed back, "Ask his in-laws." The words felt like armor, a small act of defiance that tasted unexpectedly sweet. I pressed send, feeling the first flicker of control in a weekend that had otherwise been stolen from me. The lake trip had revealed more than their fun. It had exposed the true cost of my sacrifices. I could no longer ignore it. Something had to change. My phone buzzed again, breaking the quiet tension that had settled over my apartment. Another message from Henry Mom. "Need 2,800. Mortgage is due. It's urgent." I stared at it, my fingers hovering above the screen. For a moment, guilt pricked at me, the same instinct that had always driven me to help, to cover, to make everything right. But this time, something inside shifted. The lake photos. The laughter I had never been part of. The months and years of unnoticed sacrifice, all of it pressed against my chest with a weight I could no longer ignore. I typed carefully, "Ask his in-laws." Hitting send felt strange, foreign. My heart raced, a mix of anxiety and exhilaration, as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff and finally letting go. I expected a flood of protest, maybe anger, perhaps even tears. There was a pause, then a single reply. "What do you mean I didn't respond?" I couldn't. My mind replayed every quiet compromise, every weekend spent working extra shifts, every dollar that had crossed from my account to theirs without acknowledgement. For the first time, I recognized that helping had stopped being generosity. It had become expectation, obligation, and exploitation. I set the phone aside and exhaled slowly. The room felt different somehow, charged with an energy I hadn't known I carried. Saying no was terrifying, yes, but it was also a revelation. I was no longer just the one who gave. I was the one who decided. For the first time in a long while, my choices belonged to me. The tension didn't vanish instantly, but it shifted into determination. I would navigate the coming days with this newfound clarity, balancing empathy with self-respect, ready to confront the reality I had been avoiding. And as I closed the blinds against the late afternoon sun, I knew this was the moment everything was about to change. The apartment was quiet, almost eerily so. The hum of the city outside barely reaching my window. I sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, phone beside me, and a stack of printed bank statements spread around like a battlefield map. Each line, each transfer, every $2,800 monthly payment carefully labeled, carefully recorded, told the story I had been avoiding for too long. For 3 years, I had believed I was helping. I had thought my generosity kept the family afloat, that my sacrifice was valued. But now the truth was undeniable. I scrolled through screenshots of transactions, timestamps glowing on my screen. There was the mortgage payment to Henry's mother, the property tax contributions, the small emergency funds I had supplied, each one a testament to my silent labor and trust. Each one now felt like a dagger. My hands shook as I organized the documents, aligning them month by month, year by year, constructing a narrative of exploitation. The full scope hit me like a physical blow. Over $100,000 had flowed from my account, funding a family I had never truly been part of, a family that had laughed and played while I worked overtime, unseen and unacknowledged. The betrayal settled into my bones, cold and heavy, but beneath it stirred something else, a fierce, exhilarating clarity. I reached for my phone again and opened the bank app. This time, I wasn't checking on them. I was preparing myself. A call to a local credit union connected me to Patricia, a teller with kind brown eyes and streaks of silver in her hair. I needed an account in my name only. There was no judgment in her voice, just efficiency. I handed over the check from last weekend's overtime, feeling the weight of each dollar as a key to something I had forgotten. Existed autonomy. As the account opened, I felt a quiet satisfaction ripple through me. For the first time in years, the money I had earned would belong entirely to me. I could control it, protect it, and use it to rebuild the life I had neglected while funding theirs. I leaned back against the wall. The statements still spread around me, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of triumph. The groundwork was laid. The pieces were in place. The next step, taking full control, would come. But for now, I allowed myself a rare moment of calm. Strategic empowerment. The tide was turning, and this time, I was steering. The keys felt heavy in my hand, each one a small hammer breaking the chains I hadn't realized I was still wearing. I pushed open the door to my new apartment. The smell of fresh paint and sunlight hitting the hardwood floors immediately grounding me. It was modest, one bedroom, a small kitchen, a view of the quiet street below, but every inch belonged to me. No shared bills, no hidden expectations, no lingering obligation to a family that had never truly included me. I set my bag down and ran my fingers over the counter, over the sink, over the empty space that waited for my things. Each movement was deliberate, a quiet assertion of control. The first box I unpacked held the essentials, my scrubs, a few personal books, and the laptop I used to organize my finances. With each item in place, a small, potent sense of relief began to grow, replacing the exhaustion that had settled into my bones. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Dr. Chen in her sunlit office. A box of tissues on the desk and soft chairs around her made the space feel safe. I spoke cautiously at first, recounting the lake photos, the transfers, the exclusion. Her voice was steady and validating. Maris, this is financial abuse. It's real. You've been manipulated, and your feelings are valid. A lump rose in my throat, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to explain myself or justify my generosity. Back in my apartment, I opened a new bank account in my own name, transferring the first portion of the money I had been sending out every month for years. The card felt heavy in my hand, tangible proof of independence. Each small deposit into my freedom fund was a deliberate reclaiming of what was mine. I could pay for repairs I'd been postponing, buy groceries without fear, even consider a weekend away just for myself. That evening, I stood on the balcony, looking out at the quiet Portland street below. Lights flickering in apartment windows. The city hummed softly, indifferent, yet I felt a fierce, private triumph. For the first time in years, I had built a space where I could breathe, think, and exist without obligation. The relief was visceral, the empowerment quiet but undeniable. I was no longer a passive participant in my own life. I was steering, deliberate and unafraid. As I closed the balcony door and set my laptop on the counter, a small smile curved across my face. This apartment, this bank account, this sense of control, they were only the beginning. The notifications started subtly, an Instagram post here, a text there, but soon they multiplied like wildfire. Maris leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning the screen as her family's responses unfolded in real time. Photos of the lake house had been re-uploaded with captions dripping with frustration and veiled accusations. Comments from cousins, in-laws, and friends called her selfish, heartless, even manipulative. She felt no panic, no sting. Instead, a calm clarity settled over her. Every post, every annoyed emoji, every frantic message from Henry or Melissa reinforced what she already knew: her withdrawal had consequences. And she had not acted rashly. She had acted deliberately, with control. And now the ripples were visible. Her phone buzzed again. Henry's texts grew increasingly frantic, but she ignored them. letting them pile up unread. The family's carefully maintained image of loyalty and dependence was fraying, unraveling in ways that had nothing to do with her own emotions. Social media amplified their embarrassment, their scrambling to justify themselves, and she watched silently, a detached observer to the chaos she had quietly orchestrated. Even as she sipped her tea on the balcony of her Portland apartment, the city lights flickering below, Maris allowed herself a small, private smile. She had never sought revenge, never desired to humiliate anyone. Yet watching the consequences unfold, the subtle social reprimands, the hesitation in conversations, the small financial pressures Henry now faced without her monthly contributions, she felt vindicated. The satisfaction was not loud or dramatic, it was quiet, measured, a sense of equilibrium restored. For years, she had been the invisible enabler, giving without recognition, sacrificing without gratitude. Now, observing the fallout, she understood what balance looked like. She could finally breathe, knowing that her generosity had not been wasted, it had been withheld intentionally, and the world around her was adjusting naturally. As night deepened over the city, Maris closed her laptop, leaving the notifications blinking unanswered. The storm of her family's reactions would continue, but she would remain untouched, grounded, and free. The power of choice, her choice, was finally hers alone. The plane touched down in Sedona just as the sun dipped behind the red rocks, painting the valley in golden light. Maris felt a flutter of exhilaration she hadn't realized she'd been missing for years. With her freedom fund safely growing in her own account and her apartment in Portland settled, this trip was entirely for her, a reward for the courage it had taken to finally claim control over her life. Her days were filled with hikes along trails that climbed steep cliffs, the air crisp and thin, each step reminding her that she alone dictated her pace, her path at night. She journaled in her small hotel room, the red glow of sunset spilling across the pages, reflecting on the boundaries she had drawn, the friendships she had nurtured, and the lessons learned from years of invisible labor and financial exploitation. The solitude was not lonely. It was liberating. She called a few supportive friends, laughter spilling through the phone, sharing the stories of reclaiming her apartment, the subtle empowerment of ignored messages, and the joy of watching her family's reliance on her dissolve. Each conversation affirmed the person she had become, a woman who could give without losing herself, who could love without allowing manipulation, who could finally embrace her own value. On the final morning, Maris stood at the Cathedral Rock Trail overlook, wind tugging at her hair, and looked out over the vast sunlit canyons, the journey that had brought her here from long hospital shifts to quiet betrayal, to evidence gathering and first moments of autonomy felt complete. She had reclaimed her life, her finances, her self-respect. As she breathed in the clear desert air, she knew the transformation was permanent. Her past sacrifices had not been in vain. They had taught her resilience, the strength of boundaries, and the sweetness of true independence. With the red rocks glowing beneath her, Maris smiled, finally certain that living entirely on her own terms was not just a possibility, it was her reality.